For a kids game, the lore around Pokemon is all really weird and complicated. All the multiverse stuff that they chuck in every now and then, and a bunch of preteens having ownership over literal creator gods. All they really needed to do was throw in a world with a bunch of different flavours of rats to catch and leave it there. That's usually how the Pokemon game stories always start. Just find every Pokemon and that's it. Unsurprisingly, that's pretty much exactly what they did in the first generation of Pokemon. Just get all the rats and stop Team Rocket from stealing everyone's Pokemon. Well, that is until you get to Cinnabar Island and things start to get slightly complicated. When you get to Pokemon House, Mew is introduced in his journals, and they mention how the scientists used it to make Mewtwo. You later find out that Mew has the DNA of every Pokemon, because it's able to transform into any Pokemon and learn any TM. Apparently, every Pokemon can eventually trace its genealogy back to Mew. You have to assume that way back when, every Pokemon was just a Mew, but slowly they adapted to their environments and changed into different Pokemon that you have now. So back in Gen 1, the origin of all Pokemon stems from Mew, except for the man-made digital Pokemon Porygon, because that's just a weird one-off. Which is simple enough. So Gen 1 hinted at this Pokemon form of evolution. Not the Pokemon evolution that they call evolution in game, it's more like a metamorphosis sort of thing, but actual like Darwinism evolution, which was later developed with regional forms and paradox Pokemon in later gens. But Gen 4 brings in the Pokemon creation myth. First, there's the creation trio of Dialga, Palkia and Giratina, representing time, space and antimatter, and the Lake Guardians that bring emotions to living beings. These six were all created by the Pokemon that created the universe with its 1,000 arms, a Pokemon that hatched from an egg before the universe even existed. This dumb looking horse, Arceus. So, Pokemon has both a creator god in Arceus, and survival of the fittest evolution, stemming from every Pokemon's primordial genetic link, Mew. You also have to assume that both Ground and Kyogre were also made by Arceus, as they were the Pokemon that made both the land and the seas. Surely nothing could really live without them, so they had to have been made very early by Arceus as well. So that leaves 8 Pokemon that can't really be related to Mew, if the whole genetic link thing is even true. So you have to just assume that Arceus made all the important stuff, and then just chucked a bunch of Mews into the world, pad out everything else with filler Pokemon. Either that, or Pokemon just has 2 weird contradicting creation myths. Now it's time to get on to the game's contradicting histories. In one of the books in Sinnoh's Calilave library, it says that in ancient times, Pokemon and humans were even closer than they are right now, when everybody's already obsessed with Pokemon at this point. But the book says that there was a point where people and Pokemon were indistinguishable. And the original Japanese, it even said that Pokemon and people used to marry each other. So Pokemon and people were quite close. But then, in Pokemon Legends Arceus, because of Arceus, we get sent back into the past and get to see ancient Sinnoh. And everyone is absolutely terrified of Pokemon. And your character is one of the only people not too scared of the local wildlife to actually leave the village. If you want to believe that story from the library, you have to assume that the whole bit, Pokemon and people being indistinguishable, has to be ancient history. Like pre-civilization sort of stuff. I guess at one point we were Pokemon, but we slowly evolved out of it. So that would mean that Mew is somehow genetically linked to Pokemon's humans as well, which would at least sort of explain why there's so many human-like Pokemon. Also, somehow man-made Pokemon eventually become a really common thing. So we go from being indistinguishable from Pokemon to literally being able to mass produce them. Literally playing God. Speaking of which, Arceus is quite easily subjugated and controlled by an average teenager with an above average Pokeball. This god is much weaker than the technology surrounding it. Just to make things even more complicated, there's documented times in the Pokemon series where people have turned into Pokemon in some way or another. There was that time a kid turned into a Kadabra. Your mask carries the face it had from when it was human, before it died. Frostlass is apparently the spirit of a woman who got lost in a snow mountain and died. Not just what pops out when I put a Dawnstone in a snow run, apparently. Phantump is the spirit of a child who got lost in the forest and died. I'm starting to sense a little theme here. Most importantly, the real question that arises when you look at all of this stuff I've put together is why? Why do the Pokedex and other Pokemon lore dumps have all of this overcomplicated, contradicted, and overall confusing information? This is a game aimed primarily at kids under 10, and some of the material in this is creepy and probably terrifying for a kid. All of this goes to show the true goal of Pokemon's lore.
Pokemon world is a world of the demonic, of the satanic.
It's a lightning bolt, and it's a satanic Z. This character over here is called Mewtwo. Every time that you see Mewtwo, he's in this pose. 3 fingers. It means Hail Satan.
Your children need to know there's a devil, and he hates them, and he wants to ruin their life.
From the very beginning, Pokemon has been a tool used to manipulate children into indulging in witchcraft and satanic worship in an attempt to weaken the Western world and sow the seeds of chaos among us. A creator god easily controlled by a child, and an afterlife where you may end up spending the rest of eternity as a ghost, likely to get captured and controlled by a child. All this unnecessary lore and the contradiction within the creationist myth, meaning it relies on evolution for it to make actual sense, is a clear attempt to destroy people's religion and belief systems, and lead them to question their lives as a whole.